I still remember the road that led to the Harrington estate, a long, dirt path flanked by tired oak trees, their branches, knotted like arthritic fingers, stretching toward each other but never touching. It was early autumn then. The cornfields on either side had already been cut, leaving the land stripped and honest, showing every dip, every scar. I could smell the soil through the open window of my car, that mixture of earth and rain and memory that only old farmland carries. It was the first time I'd been there since Mr. Harrington's funeral. I told myself I was coming to settle the last paperwork, to finalize the estate inventory before the heirs arrived. But the truth was, I hadn't been able to stay away. Something about that house, that land, had lodged itself in my mind like a splinter I couldn't reach. The gates were open when I arrived. They had rusted in the hinges. I could hear their complaint as I drove through. The house stood beyond them, patient and weary, 2 stories of grey stone and fading shutters, its porch columns leaning ever so slightly, as though the years had grown heavy on their shoulders. It was not grand, not anymore. Time had taken its share, but it was the kind of house that still carried dignity, even in disrepair. I parked beside the barn and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was complete, broken only by the cicadas and the distant creak of the windmill, turning in slow, uneven circles. Somewhere behind the barn, a dog barked once and then stopped, as if remembering itself. When I stepped out, I saw her, Marta. She was sweeping the porch, her back straight despite her age. Her grey hair was pulled tightly into a bun, the sleeves of her faded blue dress rolled up to her elbows. I hadn't expected her to still be there. Most of the staff had left after the funeral. She must have heard my car because she looked up, and when our eyes met she smiled, and a small, cautious thing that felt both welcome and warning. "Mr. Lawson," she said. Her voice was soft, cracked by time but steady. "I thought you'd come tomorrow. I was ahead of schedule," I said, forcing a polite smile. "I needed to look through the records before the family arrives." She nodded once, then went back to sweeping. "Everything's as you left it," she said. "Nothing's changed." That wasn't true. Even from the porch I could see the dust gathering in the corners of the windows, the ivy crawling higher up the walls. The house was losing its fight with the seasons, but no one seemed willing to admit it. I took off my hat and stepped inside. The air smelled of cedar and old paper, the scent of a life carefully filed away. My footsteps echoed across the hardwood floor. In the study, the afternoon light slanted through the blinds, laying gold stripes over the desk where Mr. Harrington had spent most of his days. His handwriting still covered the calendar pinned to the wall. The last entry dated 3 weeks before he died. Inspection. Southfield fence, 10 a.m. I ran my hand over the desk. Dust, silence, regret. I had known Mr. Harrington for 10 years, drafted his contracts, witnessed his will, handled his disputes with the tenants. He was a proud man, stubborn but fair in his own hard-edged way. He trusted me, more than he trusted his own children, I think. Maybe that was why his death had left me uneasy. The will he'd signed 6 months before dying didn't quite fit the man I knew. It left everything in the land, the house, the equipment, to his son and daughter, both of whom hadn't set foot on the farm in years. There was no mention of anyone else. And yet, when he signed it, I remember his hand hesitating, his eyes flicking to Marta, who had been serving coffee in the corner. For a moment his jaw tightened, as if he wanted to speak, to add something, but he didn't. I thought it was fatigue. Now I wasn't so sure. I spent the rest of the morning cataloguing the files, checking deeds and receipts. Everything looked in order, too much in order, the kind of perfection that hides something beneath it. Around noon I stepped outside to stretch my legs. Marta was hanging linens on the clothesline, her hands moving with the rhythm of someone who had done the same thing for decades. The sky had cleared, pale blue over the fields, and the smell of hay drifted through the air. "Would you like some coffee, sir?" she asked when she saw me. "Please," I said, "if it's no trouble." She smiled faintly. "It's never trouble." We sat on the porch, each with a chipped cup in hand. She didn't talk much, and neither did I. But there was a kind of quiet understanding between us, the way there often is, between people who have shared the presence of someone they both respected, even if from different worlds. I asked her how long she'd worked here. 37 years, she said. Since before Mr. Harrington married. He used to say the house would fall apart without me. A small chuckle escaped her. Maybe he was right. I studied her face, the lines, the calmness, the sadness that lived somewhere behind her eyes. You must have known him better than anyone, I said. She nodded slowly. Better than most, perhaps. He was a hard man, but kind in his way. I wanted to ask more, about the children, about the will, but something in her tone made me stop. Instead, I said, I'll be going through the storage room later. I'll need to access the old ledgers and correspondence. They're in the attic now, she said. I moved them there when the roof leaked last winter. You'll find the key in the drawer by the stairs. Thank you. She nodded again, then looked out across the fields. He used to walk out there every morning, she said softly. Even when he was sick. Said he didn't trust the soil unless he saw it himself. That afternoon I climbed to the attic. The air was thick with dust, the beams low and uneven. I found the boxes stacked in a corner, old letters tied with ribbon, a few ledgers, a stack of yellowed newspapers. Sunlight came through a cracked window, painting everything in faded gold. I opened the first box and began to sort. Receipts, contracts, tax notices. Then at the bottom, a bundle of letters bound with a thin red string. The handwriting on the top envelope was unmistakable. Mr. Harrington's. The ink had bled at the edges, but the words were still legible. For my lawyer, if the wrong people come asking. I froze. My heart began to pound. I untied the string. Inside were 2 letters. The first was addressed to me. Lawson, if you are reading this, then my children have already come to take what they believe is theirs. They will find the will in order, because I wanted them to. But the truth is buried deeper, and it is yours to uncover. In the bottom drawer of the study desk, under the false panel, you'll find another letter. Give it to the one who has earned it. Do not let guilt keep you from doing what's right. H. My hands trembled as I read it. The second letter was sealed in a smaller envelope, unmarked except for a smudge of blue ink, as if it had once been touched by someone's tears. I put both letters back in the box and hurried downstairs. The house was silent again, almost expectant. In the study, I pulled open the bottom drawer of the desk, ran my fingers along the edges until I felt the seam of a false panel. It lifted easily, revealing the second envelope, identical to the one I'd found upstairs. This one was addressed simply to Marta. I stared at it, my pulse drumming in my ears. I should have left it there. I should have called the heirs first, followed procedure. But curiosity is a dangerous mercy. I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the ink faded but the words firm. Marta, if they ever let you read this, it means I am gone. I could not change the will without destroying what little peace remained in my family. But the law is not always the final truth. The deed to this land, the house and the barns, they belong to you. You will find the signed transfer hidden with this letter. I have no one else I trust. You kept this place alive when everyone else forgot it. Let it be yours, as it should have been long ago. Henry. I stood there for a long time, the paper trembling in my hand. Outside the wind picked up, rattling the shutters like applause. I sank into the chair behind the desk and pressed my palms over my eyes. All those years, all those contracts and signatures, and this was the one that mattered. He had left everything to her, not out of charity, out of gratitude, out of love perhaps, and Ige, the man who had written his will, who had watched him sign away her inheritance in silence, had been blind. When I stepped out onto the porch again, the sky had turned to fire. Marta stood there watching the sunset, the broom still in her hand. I wanted to tell her right then, to hand her the letter and see what peace looked like on her face. But something stopped me. She looked so still, so complete in her grief that I couldn't yet bear to break it. So I said nothing, not yet. I only watched her as the sun dipped behind the field she had tended all her life. And I knew with a certainty that hurt, that the house no longer belonged to the name on its deed, nor to the heirs waiting in the city. It belonged to her. It had always belonged to her, and soon the world would know it. They arrived the next morning, with city dust still on their coats and impatience already forming at the corners of their mouths. I had parked by the barn to make room. Their SUV rolled to a stop, where the gravel thins into grass. tires crackling like a threat. I watched from the study window as the Harrington children, grown now, but somehow smaller than the land they'd come to claim, stepped out, both in black that had never met mud. Evan went first, the son. He looked like his father, the way a shadow looks like the body that casts it. Similar in outline, empty at the center. He was all sharp lines, jaw, cheekbones, voice. "Lawson," he said, extending a hand and not meaning it. "You're early." Behind him, Claire closed her door with the carefulness of someone accustomed to things that break. She wore a neat sweater and city shoes that would sink if she stepped off the path. Her eyes swept the porch, the windows, the roofline, and came to rest on me. There was a softness in her face her brother lacked, but it was a softness made brittle by distance. I led them inside, and the house did what old houses do with strangers. It made itself taller, its floors louder, its air colder. You could hear your own heartbeat if you stood very still. In the study, I gestured toward the chairs. They didn't sit. People who come to take don't like lowering themselves. "We'll need the keys," Evan said. "To everything. Safe, barns, equipment sheds, and the inventory." "The keys are here," I said, setting the ring on the desk. "The inventory as well. You'll find a preliminary list of deeds, titles, and valuations. We'll need to walk the boundaries for anything outside the recorded parcel." "First, we won't be walking," he said, already bored. "We'll sell the lot as is." Claire flinched barely. "We should see it," she murmured. "At least once." Then to me, was he happy here at the end? The question sat between us like an old dog that knows every voice in the room. I thought of Henry's calendar, the Southfield note in his hand, the way he looked at the corn even when his hands shook. He was himself, I said. He loved the land. Evan tapped the desk with 2 fingers. "The will is plain," he said. "You drew it. The property passes to me and Claire, estate split 2 ways. We'll clear the personal effects by month's end. Donate the junk. Auction the equipment. Demolish if necessary." He smiled the way men smile at bulldozers. "Developers are already asking." Something in me recoiled. Not at the word develop. I've written those contracts. I know the numbers, but at the speed of it. The house hadn't finished grieving its owner. Its walls were still listening for his footsteps. "There are things to consider," I said. "Tenant leases. The conservation easement on the creek. And Marta. What about her?" His tone made a fact into an inconvenience. "She's been here 37 years, I said. "She'll need time." "She'll get severance," he said, already done. "The house isn't a charity." Across from him, Claire's eyes flicked to the window. Through the glass, we could see Marta crossing the yard with a basket of laundry. The cloths bright as flags in the morning light. Claire watched her for a long breath, and it softened something in her shoulders. "We can let her stay a few weeks," she said quietly. "Until she finds somewhere. Then, to me, you'll handle the paperwork." I nodded. I'd spent a career making things look tidy. It had never felt more like a sin. They toured the house like inspectors of an unfamiliar language, opening drawers, measuring with their eyes, mistaking everything that mattered for what could be priced. In the kitchen, Evan lifted a cast iron, skillet with 2 fingers, and set it down as if it had offended him with weight. In the parlor, Claire ran a hand over the piano and smiled to herself, then didn't play. On the porch, they stood and faced the fields but did not step into them. When they were finished pretending to see, they came back to the study to talk money. I let them, because words are a place to keep people while you listen for something truer. The letter to Marta lay folded in my inner pocket, too warm as if paper could carry fever. I could feel its edges through the lining, the way a man feels the outline of a decision before he names it. "Where is the safe?" Evan asked. "There must be one." "In the cellar," I said. "Documents we've already filed copies of with the county, and some personal items. His watch. The deed." "Bring it up," he said. "I think we should do this together," I replied. "Transparency helps everyone." He almost laughed. "Bring it up," he repeated, and the word up sounded like obedience. I went alone. The cellar smelled of earth and childhood, damp stone, old apples, that metallic hint of tools that remember hands. I stood at the safe and rested my forehead against the cool steel, just for a moment, and let all the noise go quiet. The combination sat in my memory like a hymn. Click, click, click. The door swung open with a cough. Inside, the deed sat where it always had, bland in its authority. I moved it aside and found what Henry had said would be there. The signed transfer of title, deed of gift executed and witnessed, naming Marta de Souza, the owner of the land and house upon his death, to be held in trust if needed, free of encumbrance, excepting the conservation easement. He had signed where a man signs when he is done being afraid. I checked the recording instructions he'd written in the margin in my hand. Hold until delivery by letter. He had relied on me to become brave at the end. I closed the safe, locked it, and took the official deed upstairs. I left the transfer in my pocket. The words pressed to my body like a confession no priest would want to hear. Evan skimmed the deed, found it in order, and tossed it back onto the desk. Good, he said. We'll take it into town after lunch. Get the first round of listings up by Friday. There's a broker I know in... A plate clinked softly in the doorway. Marta stood there with 3 ham sandwiches and a pitcher of tea, as if she had been listening not to our words but to our hunger. You'll work better with food, she said. She set the tray down, folded her hands, and waited for us to pretend we weren't starving. Eat, she added, the old authority of a woman who has kept men alive through unremarkable winters. Claire murmured thanks, took a sandwich. Evan glanced at his watch and shook his head. I don't... He looked at Marta, at the way she had placed 3 glasses and no more. Then he took one, bit once, and chewed as if trying not to like it. When she had gone, the room felt smaller, the air closer. She'll need to be out by the end of the month, Evan said to no one in particular. Tell her. I'll speak with her, I said. Kindly. Kindly is expensive, he said. Billable, isn't it? Claire set her sandwich down. We're not cruel, she said, and in saying it she made it a plea. We're just doing what has to be done. I wanted to say there are different kinds of necessity, and one of them has a kitchen and a broom and a woman who knows where every draft lives in this house. Instead, I said, there is something you both should see before we go to town. Evan frowned. What now? In the attic, I said, because courage sometimes needs stairs to climb before it can stand up. Your father left letters. That earned silence, the alert kind. Claire's face changed in a way that broke me a little, hope. Slipping out before pride could catch it, Evan stood. Fine, he said. 5 minutes. We climbed. Dust rose and turned gold in the light like something that had been waiting for an audience. I reseated the boxes, made a little ceremony of it, let them smell the old paper and hear the ribbons sigh when it came loose. I handed Evan the envelope addressed to me, the one that said, if the wrong people come asking, and watched him read. I watched the moment his mouth went hard. He put the letter down like a man puts down a mirror he doesn't like. So what? He said. He hid things from us. He always did. Claire reached for the other envelope, the one with the smudge of blue ink, and touched it with her fingertips. Who is this one for? She asked. I swallowed. Marta. The name sat in the dust and gathered light. Evan held out his hand. Give it here. I didn't. The air made a brittle sound, like ice thinking about breaking. It's addressed to her, I said. It concerns the estate, he shot back. Which concerns us? Not all of it, I said, and then, because a man should say the thing before the ship sinks. I added, he signed a transfer of title to her. The land and the house. It's executed. It's valid. Claire stepped back as if the floor had tipped. Kevin laughed once, a bark that hit the rafters and came down meaner than it went up. Impossible. Not impossible, I said. Uncomfortable. Where is it? He demanded. In my pocket, I said, and to my shame I felt a small, savage satisfaction at his face when he realized I had already chosen. And it will be delivered to the party named on it. He took a step in, and for a moment I remembered he is not a boy, and I am not young, and men who love money forget what hands are for. Claire touched his sleeve. Evan, she said softly, stop. She worked here, he said, but the word here cracked, because the walls knew better. She cleaned our rooms. She raised your father, I said, and my voice surprised me with its size. She held this place together when you were gone. She kept him alive and kind longer than any doctor could. He gave it to the person who belonged to... Claire folded into the dusty armchair and covered her mouth with her hand. It was not grief in her eyes. It was recognition. "He should have told us," she whispered. "He did," I said. "You didn't hear." Evan stared at me until the anger drained and left only a man who has built a life on arithmetic and is now confronted with music. "You'll get nothing out of this," he said, which was his way of naming all the things a person might want and finding none of them in me. "No cut, no favor. I've already gotten more than I deserve," I said. And it was true, and I hated that it had to be. We went back down without speaking. On the landing, we met Marta coming up with fresh linens, as if laundry were the one constant that could keep a world from tipping. She stood aside for us, and for a second, the four of us were level, heirs. Lawyer, Maid, on a stair too narrow for what we carried. "Mr. Lawson," she said, not looking at the others, "did you find what you were looking for?" "I did," I said, and my voice failed me, so I held out the envelope instead. Her hands did not shake when she took it, but something in the air did. She did not open it. She tucked it under her arm and said, "Thank you. The way you thank rain for arriving when the field has already decided to die." We found ourselves in the kitchen because kitchens are where hard things soften. Marta set the envelope on the table and poured tea as if the next 10 minutes would be measured in steam. Claire stood, then sat, then stood again. Evan paced, each turn cutting grooves into the tile that had been worn smooth by better footsteps. "Read it," he said. Marta picked it up. She didn't break the seal right away. She ran her thumb over the smudge of blue ink, as if greeting an old bruise. Then she opened it and unfolded the paper with that calm you only see in people who have learned to cry in private. She read silently. Her mouth didn't move, but her eyes did, once, when she reached the part about the deed, and again when she read the line about trust. Then she folded it again and set it next to the sink. "Well?" Evan said. Marta looked at me, not him. He wrote what he could not say. Her voice was almost mild. "He was a good man in the ways that were possible for him." "And the house?" Evan asked. "Because a man drowning doesn't ask how cold the water is. He asks where the shore went." Marta met his eyes and did not look away. "It was always the house," she said. "Not the walls. The keeping. He knew who would keep it." I took out the transfer and placed it on the table. The room heard the sound paper makes when it decides to become law. Claire reached for it with careful fingers. She read the first line, and the witnesses, and the date and the part about the creek easement, and then she sat back with a breath that sounded like relief and grief in equal measure. "It's valid," she said to her brother. "It's done." "It can be contested," he muttered. "By whom?" I asked. "On what grounds?" He was competent. I saw him sign. "I would say so in court, and it would be true." Evan stared at the window where the fields begin. "It is a terrible thing to learn the difference between possession and belonging." "He was our father," he said softly, and for the first time there was no iron in it, only the childlessness of a grown man. "And he is still," Marta said gently. "That doesn't stop because boards are nailed into a roof." Silence, the kind that sifts a room into who it will let stand. Then Claire stood and walked to the sink and turned. On the tap, because she needed to do something with her hands or her heart. She rinsed 2 cups that were already clean. "If this is what he wanted," she said without turning around, "then this is what we will honor." Evan's shoulders dropped the smallest degree. He looked at his sister as if seeing the last bridge and considering whether to burn it. "Developers will still buy the fields around," he said, "compromised even in surrender." "No," Claire said, and surprised herself with the strength in it. "No. We'll sell what we must to pay taxes and leave the rest alone. Or we won't sell at all. We'll ask the Conservancy. There are options." She turned off the tap and dried her hands. "We don't have to be the kind of people who erase things." He laughed, and this time it sounded almost like a man remembering how. "We've never known how to be anything else." Marta poured more tea. She set a cup in front of him as if he were a boy home late. He didn't take it at first. Then he did. He held it in both hands, the way men do when they are not sure what else to hold on to. There were papers to draft, of course. There always are. I called the courthouse and asked for the deputy recorder who still believes that law is a promise you keep with your name. I explained what we would present. I heard the rustle at her end, that meant she was finding the good ink pad. "Come before 4, she said. "We'll stay late if we must." Before we left, Marta asked for 10 minutes alone in the study. When she came out, her eyes were dry and her face was the kind of calm that made me want to apologize to whatever in the world had tried to unmake her and failed. She tied her hair tighter, wiped her hands on her apron, and said, "Let's go." We drove down the lane with the windows open, because the house deserved to hear us leave and know we would come back. The fields watched. The windmill turned, less certain now of its complaint. In the rear view, I saw the porch like a patient old face finally recognizing the name it had been called all these years. At the courthouse, we did the choreography, signatures, stamps, acknowledgments, the clerk's soft "oh" when she read the name on the grantee line. "You kept this quiet," she said to me, not accusing, just remarking on the engineering. "Required for a river to change beds without flooding the town." "It wasn't mine to say," I answered. When it was done and the seal cooled on the paper, and the deed was recorded into the great indifferent book that keeps track of who belongs to what until death or taxes or mercy rearranges it, I stepped back from the counter and watched Marta hold the certified copy as if it were a child finally handed back. She did not cry. She breathed. On the steps outside, the sun had begun to lower itself toward the line of trees. People came and went with their own small disasters and victories. Evan stared at the paper in Marta's hands and then out at the parking lot and said, "Not to anyone. I don't know what to do now." "Come back for supper," Marta said, as if the answer to most things could be found between 6 and 7 in a kitchen with a working stove. "There's stew. The kind your father used to ask for when the wind was from the north." He nodded without looking at her. "Okay," he said. "Then to me you'll send your bill." I almost said no, that my bill had been paid in full by a forgiveness I had not earned. But bills are how we let the world keep functioning while our souls catch up. "I will," I said. On the drive back, Marta sat in the front seat like a woman who had never once considered herself at the front of anything. She held the deed on her lap. At the curve past the pond, she touched my sleeve, not to stop me but to point. 2 geese had landed and were making their small theater of territory known. We watched them until the road asked again to be noticed. When the house came into view, it looked the same, which is how you know a miracle has occurred. The world does not change its face, only its heart. We parked by the barn. Marta got out and stood very still. Then she walked to the porch steps and paused. As one does just before crossing a threshold, she looked up at the lintel where Henry had once hammered a nail too deep and swore, and she smiled. "Home," she said, not loud, not for us, for the boards, for the fields, for the wind. I followed her inside with the, weightless fatigue of a man who has put down something he did not realize he was carrying. In the study, she placed the deed on the desk and smoothed it flat. Her palm rested there a long moment. I thought of Henry's hand in that same spot and felt the oddest tenderness for a dead man's mistakes. "Will you stay on as my lawyer?" she asked without looking up. "If you'll have me," I said. "I will," she replied. And then she did what kings do in stories when they forgive traitors. She turned and poured me a glass of water and set it in my hand and made it impossible to forgive myself any less. Evening came on soft. Claire arrived with a bag of groceries, and sleeves rolled up to her, elbows in a way that made the kitchen recognize her. Evan came later, and he stood uncertain in the doorway until the smell of stew negotiated a truce between the day and the man. We ate at the big table with the dent where a bowl had cracked years ago, and no one mentioned selling anything, and no one mentioned money at all. After, Evan took a dish towel from the drawer and dried the plates because his hands needed to learn a new purpose. Later, when the house had settled into that deep, particular quiet it used to keep for Henry's last hour at the desk, I walked the back porch alone. The stars were out in their old positions, unchanged by our small, loud day. Somewhere in the dark, the dog barked once, then trusted me. I sat on the top step and let my spine remember what upright felt like, without pride weighing on it. I took the letter. Henry had written me out of my pocket and read it again in the porch light. "Do not let guilt keep you from doing what's right." It is a simple sentence, which is the only kind worth carving into a man if you expect it to heal him. Behind me, through the screen, I heard Marta moving in the kitchen, the soft percussion of a house being put to bed by its owner. She turned off the last light and came to the door. For a moment we listened together to the fields, crickets, a breeze negotiating with the corn stubble, the steady tick of the windmill forgetting to complain. "Thank you," she said. "You don't owe me that," I replied. "I don't," she agreed. "But I owe the truth a witness." We stood a while longer saying nothing, until the kind of silence that means peace finally came and sat with us like an old friend who never asks why you left or how long you'll stay, only slides the chair closer and says, "Without words, there is room." The next few weeks passed with the slow rhythm of recovery, not just of the land, but of the people bound to it. The estate that had once been a battleground of silence began to breathe again. I came to the farm nearly every day, though I told myself it was to help Marta organize the documents, file the transfer, and finalize the remaining estate taxes. In truth, I think I came because I didn't know how to return to the city, to my office, to the easy lies of polished floors and cold air conditioning. The farm had changed me, or perhaps it had simply reminded me of something I had forgotten, that the law, when stripped of ambition, was meant to make things right, not merely official. Marta met me on the porch each morning, her sleeves rolled up, a pencil tucked behind her ear. She kept the old house alive the same way she had for years, through motion, not sentiment. While others might have celebrated her inheritance with rest, she seemed busier than ever, tending to repairs, repainting window frames, keeping records in a tidy notebook that never left her apron pocket. "You never stop working," I told her once, half in admiration, half in worry. She looked up from the ledger and smiled faintly. "Work is prayer, Mr. Lawson, and I have a lot to pray for." It struck me how she still called me Mr. Lawson, even now that she owned everything I had once come to take from her. I had offered her my first name weeks earlier, but she had simply nodded and continued calling me the same. Perhaps it was habit, perhaps dignity. The heirs had both left by then. Evan returned to Chicago to manage the business that had never needed managing. Claire, however, stayed behind a few extra days, helping Marta catalogue her father's belongings. The two women formed an unexpected friendship, the kind born not of shared circumstance, but of mutual understanding. Claire confided to me once, as we sat under the oak tree near the barn, that she felt more at peace in those few days than she had in years. "She doesn't hold resentment," Claire said quietly, looking toward the house. "If I were her, I think I'd hate us all. But she doesn't. She just keeps living. That's her way," I said. "She's made peace with things most of us can't even name." Claire turned to me. "Do you think she'll forgive my brother?" "I think she already has. That was the last time I saw Claire before she left. She pressed my hand at the gate and said, 'Take care of her, Lawson. You're the only one who knows how to translate the world for her now.' I didn't know what she meant then, not fully. But I would soon." The days grew shorter, autumn deepened, turning the fields copper and the air thin with the smell of harvest. Marta had hired 2 young men from the neighboring town to help with the work. James and Eli, brothers with hands too big for their age and hearts too hopeful for the small world they lived in. They adored her, treated her like a grandmother they hadn't known they needed. I watched her teach them the patterns of the land, how to read the wind before the rain came, how to treat soil like something that listens. It was humbling, the way she carried knowledge that couldn't be found in books, only in the patience of doing things right, over and over, without witness or reward. One evening, as the sun set behind the fields, painting everything gold, she called me to the porch. "You still carry that look," she said, handing me a cup of coffee. "What look?" "The one that says you're waiting for someone to forgive you." I smiled without humor. "You're not wrong." She sat beside me, hands folded in her lap. "Mr. Harrington made his peace before he died," she said softly. "He told me so, though he never spoke the words aloud. He didn't need to. Some people confess with silence." "And what about you?" I asked. "Have you made yours?" She thought for a moment. "Almost," she said. "There's one more thing to do." She didn't tell me what it was then, but I could feel it, that quiet gravity around her, like a storm that had chosen its moment and was only waiting for the right sky to break. 2 days later, she asked me to go through Henry's old correspondence with her. The office was a tomb of dust and sunlight. She had brought her glasses this time, sitting at the desk as if she had been preparing for this all her life. "These are from the early years," I said, opening the first box. "Mostly business." She smiled faintly. He called it business. I called it his excuse to stay near the land. We sorted through letters and receipts, small notes scrawled in Henry's familiar hand. Then near the bottom, I found one envelope different from the rest, or yellowed. Unsealed, addressed only to M.I. Froze. "Do you want me to—" She nodded. "Read it, please." My eyes are tired. My voice shook slightly as I began. "M, I never told you how I came to this place. My father bought it when the last war ended. But I think he always hated it. Too honest. Too far from the noise he craved. I stayed because I needed to learn how to be silent. You were the first person who ever made that silence feel safe. I could not give you the life you deserved then, and now it's too late to ask for it. But I give you what I can, the roof that kept us, the ground that never judged, the peace I found only in your company. Forgive me for the cowardice of not saying this sooner. H." When I finished, the only sound was the wind against the shutters. Marta's hands rested quietly on her knees. I waited for her to speak, but she didn't. Her face was unreadable, not grief, not joy, something older than both. After a long silence, she said, "He never stopped trying to make things right, even when he didn't know how." She rose then and went to the window. Outside, the last light of day washed over the fields, and I could see her reflection, a woman both burdened and freed by memory. "You loved him," I said softly. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said simply, "and he loved me." But the world wasn't kind to that kind of love. I didn't press her further. Some stories don't need more words to be true. That night I couldn't sleep. The letter's words echoed in my mind, mingling with my own guilt and confusion. I had been a man who measured everything in signatures and seals. Now, I was surrounded by people who measured by something entirely different: integrity, sacrifice, heart. I thought about Henry's children, their hunger for what was never theirs to keep. I thought about Marta, who had spent a lifetime in the shadows of the home she built, waiting for the light to find her. And I thought about myself, the lawyer who had almost buried the truth because it was easier that way. The moonlight spilled across my room, pale and relentless. I sat at the desk, opened my notebook, and began to write, not contracts but confessions. I wrote about how the law had made me proud, and how this land had made me humble. I wrote about Henry's silence, Marta's strength, and the strange redemption that comes from admitting you've been part of the wrong story all along. By dawn I had filled 10 pages. None of it was legal, but all of it was true. The next morning Marta was already in the barn when I arrived. She was feeding the horses, humming under her breath. When she saw me, she smiled, that calm, knowing smile again. "So you wrote something," she said, not as a question. I nodded. "How did you know?" "Your eyes are lighter," she said. "Only people who've told the truth look like that." I handed her the pages. "It's not a legal document, but I think it belongs with the others, in the drawer with Henry's letters." She took them carefully, as though holding something fragile. "Then that's where they'll stay," she said, and just like that I felt the last of the weight leave my chest. That evening, as I left the farm, the sun dipped low behind the trees. The fields glowed amber, and the air was filled with the scent of hay and life. I stopped by the gate and looked back at the house. Marta was standing on the porch, watching the horizon, her hands clasped behind her back. For the first time I saw her not as a servant, not even as an heir, but as the heart of the place itself, the keeper of what mattered. And I realized that some inheritances aren't written on paper. They're written on the soul. The letter and the deed had settled the house into a new kind of calm. Weeks passed. Routines returned. Marta tended to her fields. The young men hauled bales from the barn. And I came on Thursdays to handle what little business the county or the bank still sent. The paper part of the world was simple again. The human part never is. By mid-November, cold fog rolled in from the creek each evening. I'd grown to like those dusks when the world shrank to 100 yards of grey. Marta would light the lamps one by one, and the house would glow like a lantern left for the lost. That night, while we sat at the kitchen table over soup, headlights flared across the yard. She looked up first. "That'll be someone from the co-op," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. I stood buttoning my coat. The engine stopped. The door of a small truck opened, and a man stepped out, tall, his shoulders bent against the wind. When he drew closer to the porch light, I recognized him, David Rourke, Henry Harrington's cousin on the mother's side, a name that had appeared once or twice in the older ledgers, and never kindly. He removed his hat as he climbed the steps. "Evening," he said. "I hope I'm not intruding." Marta came to the door behind me. "Mr. Rourke," she said evenly, "we weren't expecting company." "No one ever does, ma'am," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I was passing through. Thought I'd pay respects. Heard the place changed hands. His gaze slid past me and landed on her apron, the plain cloth where a title deed now rested in the pocket. "Congratulations." I asked him in because manners are shields, and we sat in the parlor where the fire still burned low. He refused coffee, accepted whiskey, and took it like a man inspecting proof rather than drinking it. "I'll be plain," he said finally. "My family believes there were irregularities. Old Henry was generous to a fault. But land like this, it binds to blood. Always has. The land binds to whoever keeps it alive," Marta said quietly. He smiled again, slow, deliberate. "That's a fine sentiment, ma'am. But sentiment doesn't hold up in court." I felt the heat rise in me. "The transfer was executed properly. I witnessed it myself." "Of course you did," he said, turning the glass in his hands. "But you see, the Harrington Trust predates that will. There's a clause about inheritance lines. If that's enforceable, well, the title could revert. There'd be compensation, naturally." Marta said nothing. The ticking of the mantel clock filled the room. "What exactly do you want, Mr. Rourke?" I asked. He leaned back, studying us. "A compromise. Sell me the outer parcels. I'll pay fair market. You keep the house and the 10 acres around it. Everyone walks away content." Marta's eyes met mine. "Those fields feed people," she said simply. "They're not for sale." Rourke shrugged as if patience were a coin he could afford. "Think on it," he said, setting his empty glass down. "Winter's long. Taxes longer." Then he stood, replaced his hat, and left as quietly as he'd come. Through the window we watched his taillights vanish into fog. Marta exhaled. "He smells of debt," she said. "Men like that borrow against souls." I wanted to reassure her, to quote law, but the words felt hollow. Paper could be twisted. Men like Rourke lived for the twist. The next morning I drove into town to check the archives. He wasn't bluffing entirely. There had been a family trust, established in 1923, dissolved in 1961, but parts of it had lingered, dusty filings, loopholes sharp enough to draw blood. Nothing that could overturn Henry's deed outright, but enough to harass, to drag through hearings, to drain patience and money. When I returned to the farm, Marta was on the porch mending a torn glove. "He won't stop," I said. "I know," she replied, "but fear has never tilled a field." Still, I saw the worry in her eyes when she looked toward the barns. The thought of losing even a corner of the land unsettled her more than the prospect of losing the house itself. The soil was her history, her confession, her proof of existence. A week later, the sheriff brought a letter, a formal notice of intent to petition for clarification of title. It was written in Rourke's lawyer's hand, but I could read the real message between the lines. "You don't belong here." I sat with Marta in the kitchen and explained what it meant. She listened without interrupting, then reached across the table and touched my wrist. "Do what you must," she said. "I'll bake bread." Her calm frightened me more than anger would have. "Marta," I said, "this will be ugly." "Truth always is," she answered. For the next few days, the house became half office, half sanctuary. Papers spread across the study. Coffee replaced sleep. I drafted responses, collected affidavits, even persuaded the notary to visit in person so the signatures would bear witness to the air that had made them. Marta went about her work as if nothing had changed, though I noticed she began lighting a candle in the chapel room every evening, the small alcove Henry had built long ago. She never said a prayer aloud. She simply sat in the glow until the wax melted low. One night I joined her there. The air smelled of beeswax and cedar. "You're not afraid?" I asked. She shook her head. "When you've cleaned other people's floors for 40 years, there's little left to fear, only to finish." "Finish what?" She looked up at the crucifix. "He is promised mine." The hearing date arrived in December. The courthouse smelled of old varnish and expectation. Rourke's attorney came armed with folders thick enough to make him confident. I came with 2 thin ones, both labeled in Marta's careful script, letters and ledger. The judge was an old friend of Henry's, a man who understood both law and land. When the arguments began, Rourke's lawyer spoke first, eloquent, polished, hollow. He quoted precedent-like scripture and described Marta as a woman of service, which sounded, to anyone who had met her, like blindness disguised as civility. Then it was my turn. I spoke plainly, the way Henry had written his letters. I told the story of the farm, of the man who had trusted silence too long, of the woman who had carried that silence without complaint. I handed the judge the envelope Henry had addressed to Marta and asked him to read the words aloud into the record. He did. When he reached the line, "Let it be yours," as it should have been long ago, the courtroom fell completely still. Even Rourke shifted in his seat. The ruling took 10 minutes. The transfer stood. The trust was long dead. Ownership confirmed. No appeal would change it. Outside, snow had begun to fall, slow and unhurried. Marta turned to me and said only, "Let's go home." That night, back at the farm, the wind moaned through the chimney. Marta placed the certified judgment in the drawer, beside the other papers, and closed it gently, as if sealing a grave. "He can rest now," she said. "So can you," I replied. She looked at me for a long moment. "Not yet. There's still winter to outlast." We sat by the fire until it burned to embers. I thought of the years behind her, of the courage that looked nothing like war but felt the same. Outside, the snow covered the fields evenly, without prejudice, every furrow, every scar, every story hidden beneath. Winter lingered longer than anyone expected. The drifts along the fences melted and froze again, sculpted by the wind into shapes that looked like sleeping animals. The house groaned in the cold, but it held. The farm held. Every few days I drove out with supplies or mail, pretending business, while the truth was that I just wanted to be sure the world hadn't taken back its fragile gift of peace. Marta lived as she always had, steady, self-contained. She shoveled the steps before dawn, baked bread for the boys who helped her, wrote small notes in that ledger of hers. She rarely mentioned the trial. When she did, it was to say, "It's over. Let the land forget the noise." Yet the strain had left traces. A tremor in her hands when she lifted the kettle, a pause on the porch steps before climbing. She was aging all at once, like trees that hold their leaves too long and drop them all in one night. I began staying over sometimes, taking the guest room near the stairs. We pretended it was for convenience, papers to review, letters to answer, but we both knew the truth. Neither of us liked the silence of being alone anymore. March arrived like a shy apology. The snow retreated, the ground softened, and one morning a thin green line appeared across the farthest field. "Winter wheat," Marta said when she saw it, eyes bright. "He planted it last year. I thought the frost had killed it." She walked out to the edge of the field with her shawl wrapped tight, bent down, and touched the young shoots with the care one gives a child's hair. "It remembers," she whispered. That night we ate supper, in the kitchen with the windows cracked just enough to hear the frogs waking by the creek. She spoke little, only hummed as she washed the dishes. When she turned to dry her hands, she said, "I've been thinking about the children, Evan and Claire. Yes, they should come back. Not for papers, for supper. The house isn't complete until it feeds them again." I hesitated. "After all that's happened?" "Especially after," she said, and I understood. Forgiveness was her harvest. She couldn't rest until it came in full. 2 weeks later, they did come. Claire wrote first, a short, careful letter asking if she might visit on a Sunday. Marta sent a reply written in her neat, looping hand. "There will be stew and bread. Bring your brother." They arrived under a sky the color of pewter, the road muddy from rain. When they stepped onto the porch, Marta opened the door before they could knock. She looked smaller beside them, but somehow larger too. "You're late," she said with a smile. "The bread is cooling." Evan's eyes darted to mine, uncertain, but Marta's calm was contagious. We ate in the kitchen just as she had planned. Conversation came slowly at first. Weather, repairs, the wheat, but before long laughter found its way in, cautious but real. Claire helped wash the dishes afterward. Evan carried wood to the stove. It felt like the house itself exhaled. When they left that evening, Marta pressed a loaf of bread into Claire's hands and another into Evan's. "Take something that remembers this place," she said. "It will remind you what decent work tastes like." As their car disappeared down the lane, she stood at the gate a long while. "I'd have liked this day," she murmured. He always wanted peace, though he never knew how to ask for it. A few days later, she caught a chill. It began as a cough, then deepened. I brought the doctor from town, but she waved off most of his fussing. "It's the season," she said. "The body just wants a little rest." But rest was something she didn't know how to take. By the second week, she stayed mostly in bed. The window cracked so she could hear the fields. I moved a small desk into her room and kept working there. Reading contracts aloud to fill the silence. She'd interrupt occasionally, correcting my Latin or teasing my handwriting. One evening, as the sun turned the curtains orange, she said, "Do you remember what he wrote in that first letter? Do not let guilt keep you from doing what's right." "I remember." She smiled faintly. "You did what was right, Lawson. Don't spend the rest of your life apologizing for it." Her breathing grew shallower after that. I sat beside her through the night. Near dawn, she stirred, opened her eyes once more and whispered, "Tell the land thank you." Then she was gone. Spring broke fully a week later. The funeral was small, just the three of us, and the two young farmhands standing awkwardly by the gate. We buried her near the south field beneath a young oak. The priest read the psalm she had chosen, but it was the sound of the wind through the wheat that felt like her real eulogy. After they left, I stayed. The farm seemed to hold its breath. I walked through the empty house, each room humming with the memory of her footsteps. On the desk in the study, I found her ledger open to the last page. She had written only 4 words in her careful hand. "Everything in its season." I closed the book gently. The years have passed since then, but I still drive out every spring. The young men who once worked for her run the place now, proud and capable. The house has been repaired, but they kept her curtains, her teapot, her quiet order. In the evenings, when the sun settles low, the porch glows the same warm amber it did that last summer we shared. Sometimes Claire visits, her children chasing each other through the yard. Evan comes less often, but when he does, he stands at the gate a long time before walking up. None of us mention deeds or courts anymore. The past has finally stopped shouting. When I park by the barn, I always take the same path to her grave. The oak has grown tall. Beneath it, the earth hums with roots and insects and the peace she earned. I bring her flowers from town. Simple daisies, the kind she liked, and set them in the grass. I always end up talking to her, though I don't plan to. "The wheat's strong this year," I'll say, or "the boys mended the south fence." Small things. The kind of details she'd have wanted to know, and sometimes when the wind shifts, I swear I can hear her answer. Not words, just the low, steady rhythm of someone still tending the world. As I drive away, the sun slides behind the fields, painting the sky the color of forgiveness. The house shrinks in my rear view, mirror until it's just a blur of light between trees. I think of Henry, of Marta, of how their lives and mine became threads in the same weave. Law and love, paper and earth. We tried, all of us, to put things right. In the end, perhaps that's all redemption ever is. Not perfection, just the long, patient work of trying. And every spring, when I see the first green shoot break through the soil, I remember her voice saying, "Work is prayer." So I keep working, and I keep praying. For the land, for the living, for everything in its season.